I don't have the sense that the problem is a resource shortage. I have the sense that it is just a very sort of a confounding problem. These gangs and people who are carrying guns more so than before. And, you know, I don't have the sense that it's a resource problem per se. I'm sure if that was the case, I would have heard about it by now. I mean, you know, sure, I guess more people might help you with some of these things, but I'm not sure it represents the answer.
Well, we're going to try anything specific in like.
Sorry, David, and then you had one. I just want to. Yeah.
The report talks about monetizing assets, and I asked Peter Wall specifically about does that mean looking at asset sales, including Toronto Hydro, and he wholeheartedly said yes. Are asset sales on the table for you?
You know, I want, just in my spirit of sort of saying that nothing is new, this is a report dated 2010. And one of the big chapters in writing the city's finances was asset monetization. And it talks in there about some of the things the city owns, various things. And I just think we have to look at these things. I've said before that, you know, no proposal has been put in front of me with respect to Toronto Hydro, and there are many complications with that involving taxes that would be levied and so forth and so on. So it may not represent anything that's viable. But I will say that we've got to open our minds to the fact that a simple declaration that every single thing that is presently owned by the city government should be owned by the city government forever, for no apparent reason other than perhaps ideology, we've got to put that behind us and at least be prepared to discuss the better use of some of the money that's tied up in those assets to build transit and housing. So in answer to the question, we have to discuss it. That's what I'm here saying today. We've got to sort of abandon some of these black and white situations where we say we're never going to do that, we shouldn't do that, we mustn't do that, there's some rule book somewhere that says we can't, and look at all of these things with a view to building a city that has proper, transparent finances and that gets things done when it comes especially to transit and housing.
Mayor Tory, can you expect a different approach to budgeting in this next go-around? I mean, we've seen borrowing, we've seen all kinds of work done behind the scenes to balance the budget at council, but I think the city manager, you could look at his comments here and he's critical of that. Can we see that, or would we see that in 2017?
I hope that you will notice the fact that we're standing here in May and that we've done a lot more work already this year at sort of identifying the nature of these problems. We have done a lot more work at notifying some of the agencies and corporations which represent a lot of the expenditure pressures that things are going to be different this year. We've had discussions with them already in the month of May, Councillor Crawford and myself and Mr. Wallace. And so I hope it's the beginning of a more transparent, much more deep diving look at the city's finances with a view to resolving these problems, but doing it in a way that is not kind of a papering over solution, but rather is something that's real and obvious. And that's why I'm suggesting we have to sort of put aside all of these past declarations, we can't do this, we won't do that, we won't do this, and put a combination of things in the window that will allow people to have the services and the kinds of investments they expect.
Sir, do you support the idea of more 24-hour construction projects this summer, and what is your message to residents who would be concerned about the noise?
It was at my initiative when I became the mayor that we embarked on having substantially more 24-hour and 7-day construction projects, and many of those have been very well received by people who've been the beneficiaries of them because it's cut down on the amount of time that we have disruption of any kind, whether it's to traffic or even just the sort of hustle and bustle of construction. I am very mindful of the fact that you have to take into account in deciding where you do these and when and how often, both the cost, because it costs us a little more, but also the impact on neighborhoods. And I can assure you that at my road construction coordination committee, we discuss places where it's possible and places where it isn't. And sometimes there's a gray zone, and we have to make sure we try to get that right for the overall benefit of the people.
Will the city be doing anything specific in light of this recent gun violence with respect to policing?
Well, I'm going to be seeking advice in the coming days. I mean, the policing decisions are left to the police. I mean, we have a police services board of which I'm a member, and we'll meet this week. And if there are some additional tools or measures that the chief and his deputies need our help with, obviously we'll be all ears. But I certainly stand ready to cooperate with them. But in the meantime, I think that what we can do that's constructive is to be supportive of the police, supportive of that neighborhood, and that we should encourage, as I have done today, the public to come forward. There are people who were there, there are people who know things that go on in that neighborhood and other neighborhoods where these things happen, and we very much need their cooperation in order to successfully deal with these things and bring these people to justice.
A couple more questions?
On the accumulated debt, are you suggesting that the Ford administration buried this debt in order to carry out effectively zero tax increases or low tax increases?
Well, what I'm suggesting to you is that there has always been an account, and there always will be an account going forward, as I say, that takes account of this timing difference that will exist sometimes between an expenditure being made and the ability to issue debt in the public markets. But to have that account reach almost $1 billion, and to have in any one year, and in this case it happened to be in 2013, $300 million added to that account is not acceptable. I mean, this is, if nothing else, hiding the truth from the taxpayers, and it had the, I suppose, added benefit of avoiding those interest charges being added to the operating budget in that year. And you know, when you look at some of these payments, if you're talking about $20 million in interest payments, either on the Toronto Community Housing debenture or on the city's debt, that's almost a point of property tax, just by itself. Just for us to look after now, coming up with the $23 million a year needed to finance that hydro debenture that was issued a number of years ago with no city council approval, is going to cost 1 point, or the equivalent of 1 point of property tax. And I won't run an administration. I mean, it's just foreign to every experience I've ever had in my life that you run an administration on the basis of that kind of thing. It's not right. I mean, and it's a huge amount of money. So those practices, the minute we found out about those things, the minute we found out about the unfinanced capital account, we asked for a plan to sort of try to write that, and we've begun to work that account down this year. And the same with the hydro, or the housing debenture, which I found out about a week ago, and we're now going to, you know, start to deal with it.
Are there any revenue tools that you would not consider?
Well, my past comments are on the record about a number of these. I've been talking about them for years just because I was asked about them over time. So I have found some that I think are perhaps better and fairer than others. But look, we'll wait for the report. It's going to come, I think, in the next month. It'll be in front of us what the full menu is and which ones impact on which people. And we'll then see what seems to be best. And of course, it's not my decision alone. It's that of the City Council.
But you are guaranteeing that one of them is going to have to, some of these roads will have to happen because you're not allowing a property tax increase. So one of these is going to be.
I am saying that property taxes are not going to go up beyond the rate of inflation for purposes of the annual operating budget. And I am saying that we have to find ways to deal with our operating shortfall and our long-term capital needs. And I am saying that out of all that will have to come some decisions that deal with that, because I'm also not prepared to run an administration that just stops building transit or stops addressing housing because these things are too urgent. I want the help of the other governments. I expect them to do more beyond what they've done, and I'm appreciative of that, but we're going to have to do our share as well.
Can you elaborate on TCH? I mean, did they just willy-nilly go and increase something that was never approved? How is that possible, and have they had their knuckles wrapped?
Well, there hasn't been time to wrap anybody's knuckles yet. I mean, my mouth hangs open sometimes when I get told of these things, but I read this long briefing note on how it all happened, and there were sort of people exchanging opinions and sending memos to each other, and, you know, just stuff that's beyond comprehension. But the bottom line was that this debenture was issued without any city council approval. And I don't care what the rules say, quite frankly. When you're coming to $400 million, I think that's about the amount here, of taxpayers' money, City Council, which owns the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, should be approving that. And there should be a full public airing of that investment. Even if it's the best investment in the world, it should be reviewed, because that's what we're all about here, is investing the public's money and having them understand how we're investing it and what we're doing with it. And so I've read this account. It would take me hours beyond my usual long answers to explain to you the process. I'm not even sure, having read the memos, that I understand exactly what was done. But bottom line, never got to City Council, never been announced. And when it was approved by the Toronto Community Housing Board back in the day, there was no repayment plan that accompanied it. None at all.
Can
So-
that happen again? Are there measures in place now that they cannot do that again?
Well, certainly, just based on my own response to what I was told, I would be very, very surprised if it happened again. But whether we need to actually look at the procedures, I think, given all these memos that were going back and forth about whether you needed to go to City Council, the very fact people were having meetings and writing memos asking the question indicated that the answer should have been yes. Of course we go to City Council because we opt for transparency and we opt for, you know, full disclosure of this and so on to our shareholder. And it wasn't done, and it was a long time ago, but the bottom line is I would just hope that alone would cause people to stop writing the memos and just start, you know, being upfront about these things and taking it to the place where we make these decisions ultimately here when it comes to huge sums of taxpayers' money.
Mayor Tory, one of the items on the executive agenda for next week recommends spiking that Expo 2025 date. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I sort of turn initially, there are many who are very enthused about this and who believe it's going to do a lot for the development of our waterfront and so on. I want to go back to a report that I asked for and received. And in that report, it indicated that the first thing that the city government should look at any time we're asked to bid on any one of these big, or sometimes smaller, but certainly the bigger international events is, do you have the support of the other governments? In this case, the support of the federal government is required, in particular in the context of rejoining the BIE, the group that awards expos, and in regard to one of the other two governments has to sign a piece of paper saying they're going to backstop this expo financially. And so we're not at the stage yet where any of those things have been secured, and I haven't even had a sort of a detailed discussion with the other governments about it yet. It's been discussed in passing. And so I don't want to discourage the people who are who believe in this very strongly, and they should go about doing their work and trying to see what support there is for this out in the community, and I gather there's quite a bit. But I will take no sort of position in terms of saying, well, yes, we're going to do it, or no, we're not, until I follow my own checklist. You don't ask for those reports if you don't want to follow the advice that they've set out, and I think the advice was very wise.
And the CHC over here.
I'm sorry, Christina, yeah.
CHC loan, you said it'll cost 23 million a year in terms of repayment. How many years?
I think it goes out to 2030 something. I mean, it's a long way out. I mean, all of this debt is longer term debt, but understand when the city issues debt, it is always on a timetable. The debentures are always for a given term, and over that period of time, the objective is for the city taxpayers' money to retire that debt so that you can then, if you need to, go out and borrow again to build something else. And so in this case, there was a great amount of borrowing done. It was in the hundreds of millions. Don't quote me on the exact number I said. I think it was around 400 million. But there was no repayment plan at all. So now they have finally, better late than never, put one in place, and the amount of interest approximately for this year is about $20+ million, and that forms part of the challenges that you heard Mr. Wallace describing this morning.
And that starts now.
Well, it starts now because, yes, and we're going to have to sort of repay this over the term. And again, there's just so many things I've read about this, Christina, that I don't remember the exact dates, but it goes out into 2030 something, I think, and it's a sort of a standard, these things are standard 30-year terms. It was issued in 2009, I think, 2009. We can get the details, or they will have it at the Housing Corporation, I'm sure. We'll take maybe one more, and then we have to go. I just want to make sure, is there somebody I haven't had a question yet? Okay, well then we'll go back to
Amsterdam has a night
Cynthia.
mayor, somebody who works with the entertainment industry. And I guess my question is, would you consider implementing a night mayor who would work with the entertainment industry to ensure a lively evening industry in this city?
This is another City TV trick question getting
not.
designed to get me to say that I already am the nightmare, and I think there would be people out there who'd agree with that. For the moment, I don't see us necessarily doing that, because I think we have a number of very good people, whether it's our film commissioner or our music advocate, Mike Tanner, Zabe Sheikh, of course, our film commissioner, and people who are very dedicated. And I've made it my own business to be the advocate that is going to sort of help make us Music City, build up our film industry, and so on. I realize that's not all of what's being talked about here. I read of the idea with interest, and so I wouldn't say no to it, but for the moment, I'm really trying to sort of be somebody who, is a great advocate, and yes, a cheerleader sometimes for these industries, because I think they're so important not just to the economy of the city, but to its creative soul, which I think is going to be ultimately very important to our attracting jobs and investment, and to being a city that people want to live in and see as a magnet.
Mayor Tory, does the city
Last question.
Does the city need more hands-on control of the police budget in particular? The city manager talked about a whole government approach. We saw in the last one where you guys were handed a package at the end and said approve it, and then there was a revolt that had to be beaten down. Should the city council have more say as the police budget is made?
I will say that with respect to all of these budgets of these sort of, I'll call them, they're not really outside organizations, but they're organizations that have slightly different governance. And there's a number of them, of course, police, TTC, housing, and so on. There's a need for greater oversight. And there's a need for greater partnership and collaboration in putting those budgets together. As I said, we were into the habit over many, many years before me of just getting a few pieces of paper and them saying, this is our budget, and, don't call us, we'll call you. And so that has to change, and it will change, and it is changing. With respect to the police in particular, I am extremely gratified at what I hear is going on with the Transformation Task Force, which will submit a report in June as scheduled. And I think there's some good things happening there, not just on the budget, but on the sort of modernization of policing. And I think it will have some positive budgetary consequences, but we'll see that report when it comes in June. But I'm optimistic that for the first time, we really are going to come to grips with some difficult decisions again, but decisions which I think we can take in partnership with others to address some of these challenges we face on the budgetary front. Thanks very much.